Good evening and welcome and happy Hanukkah to everybody. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Dalit Horn and I'm the Executive Director at the Vilna Shul Boston Center for Jewish Culture. The Vilna is located in historic Beacon Hill, and it's the last remaining immigrant-era synagogue in Boston and now serves as a center for Jewish engagement. We offer opportunities to connect and explore one's culture, experience the arts, and engage in big ideas and pressing issues for Boston's Jewish community. This program is presented with the Hadassah Brandeis Institute. Hadassah Brandeis Institute is a research institute at Brandeis University dedicated to researching all things Jewish from our history to liturgy through the lens of gender. Before we get started, I wanted to clarify a few housekeeping rules. First, the program tonight will be recorded and posted to the Vilna's YouTube channel shortly after tonight's program. Second, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat box at the bottom. I see a couple of people have already been doing that. And at the end of the program, we'll have time, about 15 minutes, for conversation and Q&A with Sarah and Rav Tiferet, our moderator for this evening. Lastly, I wanted to let everybody know that due to the high volume of people in this program, everyone, with the exception of those who are presenting, will be muted. We have over 250 people who have registered for tonight's program. And you can expect this program tonight to last about 65 to 70 minutes. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite our guests to the virtual stage. They should feel free to turn on their cameras as I happily introduce them. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Rav Tiferet.
Hello.
Sarah is the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism, after finally choosing to look there. Sarah Hurwitz was a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, starting out as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama and then serving as chief speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Prior to that, she was the chief speechwriter for the Hillary Clinton campaign. In this entertaining and accessible book, she shows us why Judaism matters and how its message is more relevant than ever, and she inspires Jews to do the learning, questioning, and debating required to make their religion, this religion, their own. Having had a front seat at the intersection of race, racism, and religion, Rav Tiferet Berenbaum, the rabbi of congregational learning and programming at Temple Beth Zion in Brookline, Massachusetts, has gained valuable insights into how people see the world and refined her powers of empathy. She combines this deep understanding of people with knowledge of Judaism to engage learners from preschool children to adults in our community's spiritual, social, and educational programming. And without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce them to you, introduce them to one another once again, and for you guys to take it away.
Thank you so much, Dalit. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, Rav Tiferet.
I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. So before we jump into questions about the book and your perspectives, we would really like the opportunity to get to know you as a person and some of your background and your journey. So can you tell us about how you got into politics and what was it like to write for Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton, two very powerful women?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I actually got my start as an intern in the summer of 1998 in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office. So I'm dating myself a little bit. I was in college, and the writers I was working for, they helped me get my first two jobs out of college, both of which were total failures. The first was as the assistant to the speechwriter to lieutenant governor of a state. I commuted 3 hours round trip. I sat in a windowless cubicle next to the bathroom. I left after 9 months. I then spent a year writing speeches for a wonderful senator named Tom Harkin from Iowa. He's since retired, but just wonderful guy. And, I was 23 years old. I didn't know, I was a good writer, but I didn't have much experience writing speeches. And after a year, they were like, you should probably go to law school. We hear you've applied, and that's probably a good path for you. So I did, I went. And my third week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. but back then was just a classmate of mine in law school who'd previously been a speechwriter for President Clinton. And the two of us just started freelance speechwriting together. And he really taught me how you write a speech. So we got jobs on Wes Clark's primary campaign for president in 2003, and he lost. Got jobs on the Kerry campaign in 2004, and he lost. I got a job as Hillary's chief speechwriter in 2008, and she too lost. Note a pattern here. And then I got hired on the Obama campaign to write for then Senator Obama, and he won, which is very exciting to me. Like, didn't realize you could actually win these things. And we went to the White House. And when I was on the campaign, I had met Mrs. Obama when I was working on her 2008 Democratic National Convention speech. We really hit it off. I thought she was amazing. I was there to write for him. So I went to the White House to write for him. And after a year and a half, 2 years, I realized I actually just missed writing for her. I felt like I was more at home in her voice, more interested in a lot of issues she was talking about. So I made a kind of unusual White House career move to switch back over to writing for her. And, in terms of what was it like to write for these women? I mean, Hillary Clinton was my hero, has been my hero since I was a teenager. So I think the idea when I got hired on that campaign, I was really intimidated, to think of writing for this icon, it was really kind of intimidating, and she's brilliant and she's passionate and she's warm. And it was great. It was an exciting campaign to be part of, but it was also it was a hard campaign. You had the Hillary Obama tension, and I had friends on the other side, and it was a pretty tough primary. And so when Hillary conceded and then I went over to write for Obama, it was like, sort of a transition back to working together with these colleagues again. And I think writing for Mrs. Obama, I really feel like she was my speechwriting soulmate. She is someone who knows who she is. She always knows exactly what she wants to say. When people say, "Oh, you're the woman who you used to put words in Michelle Obama's mouth," like, no. You ever seen this woman? Nobody puts words in Michelle Obama's mouth. She just had such an instinct for good speaking, good writing, and she would really just give me a download before when we met about each speech, and I would try to just take notes verbatim, work into a draft, really go back and forth, like a lot of really intense editing. She was a really rigorous editor, very high technical standards for speeches, like perfect transition, had to be totally logical, precise flow. The language had to be moving and vivid. So she really made me a better writer. And I think, the exciting thing about both Hillary and Michelle, it was just like traveling with them. When you travel around, across the country, around the world, these are just such well-known women, and so many people have been inspired by them. So to see them walk into a room, and especially to see young people just light up and just see like, oh, there's someone who, I can see my story in them. Maybe I can be like them. And just, if I asked you who is the first spouse of name a country, Argentina, Ghana, Japan, Germany, I don't know. Maybe first spouse, trivia. I don't know who those people are, but in every country, young people knew who Michelle Obama was. Wow. And to see their excitement at her and her story and her passion and brilliance, it was pretty thrilling.
Wow. It's an exciting beginning and continuation. So what about your Jewish journey? Like, how did you wind up writing a book about Judaism?
You don't think that's like a natural next step after 8 years in the White House?
I do, but
I know. I feel like you're like my fellow Judaism nerd who's I'm like, you're like, of course, the book has 550 endnotes. Shouldn't all books have all of that? Shouldn't they all have endnotes to Talmud? Like, obviously. But for those who are not big Judaism nerds, it's funny. I grew up maybe like some of you in, where Judaism was sort of an obligation, right? We showed up twice a year at the High Holy Day services. I attended Hebrew school. It all struck me as kind of boring. And I just thought like, I became a bat mitzvah. We did the thing. And then it was like, okay, thanks. I'm done, right? Like I'm a cultural Jew. I'm a Jew by heritage. But, if I want meaning or spirituality, I'm going to find it in Judaism, obviously. And then fast forward 25 years later, I broke up with a guy I'd been dating at the age of 36. I had a lot of time on my hands. I happened to hear about an intro to Judaism class at the local Jewish community center. And I signed up just to fill a Wednesday night. Like it was not some deep spiritual journey. I think people want it to be. They want me to be like in crisis. And then I found Judaism and then I was saved. That's actually a very Christian story. It's not really a very Jewish story. But what I found was like, I was just blown away. Here's 4,000 years of crowdsourced wisdom from millions of people about what it means to be human, how to be a good person, how to lead a worthy life, how to find profound spiritual connection beyond God is a man in the sky, which that's not a Jewish theology, you know. And I just thought, where has this been all my life? Like, this wasn't in those two services. This wasn't in Hebrew school, because Hebrew school is for children. This is for adults. And so I started learning, and I found it really hard. I found it just hard to learn about Judaism as an adult. There were great nuts and bolts sort of how-to intro books, but I was looking for like the why to, and that led me to a lot of really esoteric and academic books that I personally don't enjoy reading. I don't like to try to pick through really academic writing. It's pretty painful. I just felt like I'm looking for a book that, yes, covers the basics, gives me the contours, but also just unearths the deepest, edgiest, most radical, transformational wisdom and advice that Judaism has to offer us today, right now in our lives. And so I decided, I'm a writer, maybe I'll just try to write a book sharing that wisdom. And it was very hard. I will tell you, made White House speechwriting look like a joke. I mean, Judaism just resists. It doesn't want, anytime you try to say something about Judaism, it fights you. It's like, no, but there are 10 counter arguments and then exceptions to the exception to the exception. Like, it just doesn't want to be reduced to simple things that you can write in a book. And that's what I love about it. But it's also what made it very challenging as a writer.
I picked up the book because there's a quote, there's a line that you have somewhere here early on, and I couldn't find it. But, it's something like, with a name like Sarah Hurwitz, I can't walk around not knowing anything about Judaism.
That's exactly, it was because of like, when I started taking this intro class, my friends thought this was hilarious. Like, one of them was like, wait a second, your name is Sarah Hurwitz. When you walk in, are the other students like, who brought the ringer? But I gotta tell you, I identified much more with those who were planning to convert to Judaism than I did with their spouses or partners who were Jewish and taking the class with them. Right? Mm-hmm. Like the people who were Jews by choice or planning to be Jews by choice, they knew much more about Judaism than I did. Mm-hmm. And they brought this like depth of commitment and perspective and just fresh look that I just was really inspired by. Mm-hmm. I'm a very big fan of Jews by choice. Big fan.
That's great. Okay, so let's jump into your perspectives and politics. So how do you think politics can affect our Judaism, right? Like, some people believe that Judaism shouldn't be political, or that rabbis shouldn't talk about politics in their sermons, and that Jewish organizations shouldn't get engaged in political issues. What do you think about that?
I mean, I'm sort of amused by it, because I often think, like, have they read the Torah? Like, have they read it? Our sacred core founding document? It's like, this is just such a profoundly political document. And if you read the Torah, it's essentially a political polemic against many of the old power structures in the ancient Near East and many of the values. This is a book that, in a nutshell, is about this very powerful God who rescues this helpless group of people who are enslaved, the Israelites, which, like, if you're an ancient Near Eastern God who's looking to build a great nation, very odd choice for the Israelites, right? These are this is not like a powerful people, but this God rescues them, frees them from slavery, assembles them at the base of the mountain, and says essentially to them, your mission is to create a society that is the exact opposite of Egypt, a society that doesn't worship pharaohs or emperors or kings, but a society that is concerned with the well-being of the most vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the poor, the stranger. This God is obsessed with income inequality. A lot of stuff about how to redistribute wealth in the Torah. This God is obsessed with poverty. A lot of thinking about caring for those who are in financial need. This God is obsessed with the stranger, right? 36 times, love the stranger. Who's the stranger? The stranger is the non-Israelite, right? That is the immigrant, the refugee. So this God really has some thoughts on this. And look, do I think that you can say Judaism says X about healthcare, or Judaism says Y about immigration? No, of course not, right? You know this better than I do. You're a rabbi. You've studied our laws. Like, we don't know. Judaism does not speak with one clear voice about any public policy issue. I think you can make Jewish arguments on many sides of many issues. I happen to think some are more convincing than others, but that's fine. We can debate. But I think to just say we shouldn't talk politics at all, we shouldn't touch on these issues at all, you're talking about kind of excising a lot of our core document, and I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Never mind the Haftarot that we read every week to go along with the Parshiot. I mean, the prophets are screaming politics.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, turning to like how we talk about people that we may think differently about or feel differently from, Judaism has a lot to say in terms of gossip, right? But it's not just a matter of don't do it. So what can we learn from Judaism, from our tradition, as it relates to fake news and what we're experiencing with democracy and social media?
Oh, I love this question. When I think about the sort of defining characteristics of Jewish ethics, it is this real particularity. You often hear this lie that Christianity is a religion of love, but Judaism is a religion of law. And that's just so asinine. I mean, that's such a stupid thing for someone to say, because the reality is Jewish law is how we express and demand love, right? It is how so an example for, Jewish law is very much in the weeds, right? It's not just, give to the poor. Well, how are you going to give to the poor? Do you do it in a way that humiliates them or not? That empowers them or not? You go way down into the weeds of Jewish law to the point where you're actually saying, well, if you've given someone a loan and they can't afford to pay you back, and you happen to see them walking down the street, avoid them, right? Don't run into them. You're just going to embarrass them or stress them out. It's like, really? That weedy? But yes, that's actually the beauty of Jewish law, is it is demanding that you take into account the particular needs and humanity and dignity of every individual, unique person created in the divine image, right? That is the Jewish ethic. And that is why our law is so detailed, because we actually care about every single individual, particular human being. And I think that has to do with speech, in that, as you know, you see that in our laws about speech, right? They're so kind of weedy, and they're contemplating this situation and that situation, but it's important. So when I think about social media and fake news, I think the number one thing that strikes me about our laws around speech and communication is that, consequences, that words have consequences, right? Life and death, as Psalms say, is in the tongue, right? And that is not, look at the Holocaust, right? This did not start with concentration camps. It started with propaganda. It started with words, right? And so I think, when I'm thinking about this, the scenarios about gossip where, maybe I come to you one day and I say, oh, Rav Tiferet, let's say I get into a fight with my friend Jane, so mad about her, so mad at her. So I go to you and I say, Rav Tiferet, Jane's the worst. I think she's rude, she's immature, I don't trust her, she's dishonest, she's just the worst. And I feel better, and I've gotten it off my chest. And then maybe you just happen to tell a few people some stuff I said about Jane, and maybe they happen to tell a few people. And, the next day, Jane and I make up at work. It's a misunderstanding. Okay. Well, the problem is there's now this stuff out there floating around about Jane. And maybe a month from now, Jane applies for a job at the company where one of the people who heard this stuff works. And that person's like, wait a second, I've heard some things about this woman. I can't, something about dishonesty or rude. I don't know. Maybe let's just hold. Right. With my carelessness, with my thoughtlessness, I actually really impacted her life. And so I think, number one, words have consequences, right? This fake news, it has cost lives, hundreds of thousands of lives already in this pandemic, right? And the anti-vaccine stuff, this has real consequences. So I think having an acute awareness of the consequences of the word we speak are just critical. I also just think a lot about shaming, right? Where Judaism has this abhorrence of shaming people, where there is just a sense of certainly you confront people, when people are doing things that are wrong or bad, of course you confront them, but you do it in a way that actually, doesn't humiliate them. You do it kind of private. I mean, there's all this whole bunch of law about how you do this. And so I think also thinking about is this just me shaming someone, or am I actually teaching them? Am I actually educating them? Am I actually getting them to change? Because I think what you're seeing is oftentimes shaming doesn't really work. And I think Judaism has some sense of that. So I think, those are two pieces of, I think, Jewish wisdom that just feel particularly relevant today.
Yeah, our tradition has so much to say about this.
Yes.
And about not saying things to people that they can't hear. It's it's a waste of time. It's a waste of breath.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to the evolution of the Jewish tent and the need to address gender issues specifically as they relate to sacred texts?
Yes. It's something that kind of, this is not what you're asking, because you know everything I'm about to say, but I do sometimes think that, folks who are maybe not the most engaged Jews, they'll be like, oh, Judaism's so sexist. I could just never engage with my tradition that's so sexist. And that's like saying, well, the Constitution is so sexist because it doesn't let women vote. I mean, it's so sexist. It's like, what are you talking about? Right? We literally changed that 100 years ago. Right? That was the original version of the document, which we spent the past 250 years rewriting. And this is something that I think many Jews don't know about our own tradition. The Torah was not the last word, it was the first. Right? Like we have, I encounter this often in my beloved Christian friends who they're like, well, we have to wrestle with the Old Testament and how violent and difficult it is. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, we have the New Testament. I'm like, yeah, we also have a New Testament. It is called the Talmud. And all of the hundreds and hundreds of years of commentary, we've spent 2,500 years reinterpreting this document. Starting, 2,000 years ago, ancient rabbis looked at the whole eye for an eye thing and they were like, no. That's not it. If you put out my eye, you have to pay me monetarily. That's what that text meant, right? That was 2,000 years ago. And we have literally spent 2,000 years changing, reinterpreting. And so, if you see things that are sexist in the Torah, the answer is, yeah, it's a 2,500-year-old document. My question is, how are people interpreting it today? And are there Jews who interpret it in a way that I think is incredibly sexist and misogynistic? Yes, they are. And I'm going to be very blunt about that. And I'm going to challenge them. But the vast majority of American Jews do not interpret our documents that way. Mm-hmm. I'd also just point out that there's actually a fair amount in Judaism that's actually pretty empowering to women. I mean, we outlawed marital rape 2,000 years ago. Okay, like there are states that have done that literally like 10, 20 years ago. So just, Judaism is actually like, for an ancient religion, it's not bad. And we've spent 2,500 years reinterpreting it and reimagining it, such that I think in 90% of American Jewish communities, I don't think that women can be rabbis, right? Women, I don't see a lot of distinctions in gender, right? I think I, as a woman, there's nothing that I can't do. So I just think it's important for us to have that context and that learning to know what things actually look like today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about how to phrase this because I love this question and the topic very much. Jewish spirituality. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are looking for solace right now. But while we often say God or Adonai in our prayers and synagogue, Jews don't really talk much about God and what we mean, what we think, what we imagine when we say the word God. So what does God mean to you, and what could it mean for Jews who are struggling right now?
I love this question. I would like to talk about God all the time. It makes me deeply sad that many Jews seem to think that Judaism kind of reflects the kind of distorted religious conversation that we see in America today about what God is, where God is often homophobic, sexist, racist, endorses certain political candidates, thinks certain clergy deserve another check. I mean, this is kind of a God that we see in the public discourse. And a lot of Jews are like, thanks, but no thanks. Or they read our prayer book or they read the Torah and they see, well, God is a male gendered being in the sky who's all powerful and controls everything and kind of has an anger management problem and punishes people. And it's like, again, 2,500 years of reinterpretation. I think the thing that's just so important to understand is that like Jews have this fundamental humility when it comes to God. We do not have a dogma. We do not have a creed. We do not have a simplistic definition. We are too smart for that, okay? What we have realized is we are talking about something far beyond the reach of our tiny little human brains to neatly categorize. To do so is idolatry, right? To shrink God, something infinite and ineffable, and to the tiny limits that our little human brains can manage, that's creating an idol, and we don't do it. Instead, what we have are centuries and centuries of commentary, of thinkers, rabbis, theologians, philosophers, ordinary Jews who are sharing their conceptions, their experience of the divine. You have Jewish mystics who talk about, God is everywhere, God is everything. You have people like Martin Buber who say that God is what arises between two people in deep relation, fully contemplating and seeing each other's humanity. In those deep I-thou moments, what arises between those two people is God. You have Mordecai Kaplan, who has more of a naturalistic view about, God is what makes, is sort of what helps each of us become our highest and truest selves. It's the force that leads us to develop and self-actualize. I mean, those are 3 out of 3 million different concepts of God that we have. So I really think, first of all, it's important for Jews to understand the complexity and maturity and sophistication of our traditions around God. And I think for me personally, so many of these concepts resonate. But I will tell you, and so I think theology can kind of be a roadmap in that it can lead you to places where you're like, oh, I felt God there, right? That the sense of like, oh, I felt something transcendent in deep relationship, or I felt something in the wilderness. I mean, how often in our text does God appear to people in the wilderness? Quite often, right? So for those of you who feel this connection to God in nature, yeah, we've been doing that for many thousands of years, right? That's a thing in Judaism. But I think I'm sort of gesturing to something that's also important, which is experience. I think before I had any sense of divine experience, which is something that was really kind of opened up to me through the Jewish meditation world, I think all this theology felt kind of interesting, but a little academic. Like I couldn't really relate to it. But I think we have all in some ways had transcendent divine experiences, whether or not we're comfortable labeling them as such. Watching your child take their first breath, or holding the hand of your parent as they leave this world, or moments in nature, moments of deep human connection, moments that just feel other, right? Where you just feel in touch with something other. And you can call that neurons in your brain. That's great. Please do. That's your jam. Nobody has to believe in God. Totally fine to be an atheist in Judaism. But I think many Jews yearn for this. And I think, unfortunately, what we often are presented with is this unholy trinity of dogmatic man in the sky God, astrology and calling out to the universe, which I'm not very impressed by, or self-help. I mean, and those are tough choices. I guess I go with the self-help, but those aren't the only options, right? We have so much more. And I think that the more that we explore this and embrace this, I think in my own experience, having a felt sense of the divine, having tapped into that, I do feel like my life is deeper. I feel like it's richer. I feel like I am more deeply present in my life. I feel like my life has dimensions that it didn't have before that. So I just think to the extent that we can cultivate spiritual experiences and spiritual knowledge in a spiritual life, I think that will really enrich Jews and Judaism.
Mm-hmm. I think you're absolutely right. The idea of experience and connection that so many are yearning for. Absolutely.
Yes.
So Your Wonderful Book was published 2 years ago, and we've had a lot happen in the last 2 years. So,
yeah, I know.
So if you had to rewrite it, what would you change? Would you add a chapter or edit a chapter?
It's such a great question. I've actually thought about this, and I wonder, would I want to weave COVID examples and anecdotes throughout it? And I'm not sure. But I kind of want it to be timeless. So God willing, this will end sometime soon. And I don't want it to feel kind of rooted in one particular time period. But I do think I would reference it. And I think I actually would probably beef up what I wrote on the importance of community. I think that was something I really underdid. And I regret that. And I think it probably reflects just, when I was writing this book, I didn't necessarily have much of a sense of Jewish community myself. So it was just hard for me to, or actually I should say a sense of traditional Jewish community, like a synagogue or a shul. I found Jewish community in other different ways, but I think a lot of people do find community in their synagogue. And I don't think I acknowledge that enough. I don't think I kind of, put enough of that in the book. I also think that I think I would like to have written more about chesed, loving kindness. I just think this Jewish emphasis on presence for those who are vulnerable, right? It's so beautiful and it's so specific. You read all of these laws around visiting the sick, around, caring for people in mourning, around burying those who are dead. it is just the incredible, exquisite sensitivity to the needs and the dignity of every single, you know, of these people. It's really moving. And I think that during COVID, you know, this is something that we're all realizing the power and the importance of. You know, I think about one story that really moved me during COVID was, you know, this woman who lost her husband of 30 years to COVID. It was I think this happened in Texas. And she was kind of devastated because she couldn't have a traditional shiva, funeral, anything. But she studied the Jewish traditions, and she found that there's a tradition by which the people who've come to support the mourners at the end of the funeral, they line up in two receiving lines, and as the mourners walk through, these people offer condolences. And she was just very moved by that. And so she actually got her community to reenact this in this parking lot of her synagogue. Everyone came in their cars, they lined up in two rows with their cars, and she and her family drove through in their car. And everyone waved and blew kisses and put their hands on their hearts. And it was like, oh, wow, right? That's chesed, right? That's people showing up and showing their love. And I just wish I had written, you know, there's some stuff about that in my book, but I wish I'd done more, because I'm just finding it. I'm doing some work in training to do I'm doing some chaplaincy training. And as I spend a lot of time in hospitals visiting the sick, I'm just seeing the power and the sacredness of that much more.
Mm. Yes, I think those two things really came out during COVID. And I don't think any of us really recognized the power of community until we so desperately needed it.
Yeah, and missed it. Yes.
Very much so. Very much so. So this next question is pretty selfish of me. Because when I read this book, I was like, all of my kids need to read this. My B'nai Mitzvah students need to read this. They don't know how good they have it. So what would you say, and I'm probably going to show them this recording, what would you say to eighth graders or seventh and eighth graders who are finishing Hebrew school, who are trying to figure out Judaism and where they fit? And like together with that, because you also experienced like growing up Jewish, but then going into like a 101 space and like really searching for that connection. So what about adults who are also looking to reinvigorate their own Jewish practice or looking to connect for the first time, right? Like how can they enliven their connection to our tradition in a meaningful and sustainable way?
I love this question, because I think Jewish education is just critically important. You know, I think with the eighth graders, I would say like now it's just getting good, right? This is now the time where you can dive into the edgy, radical, really deep stuff. Like before you were a kid, you couldn't understand it. You were too little, but now you're just at the age, you just have enough maturity to start doing the good stuff. So like, this is the moment to actually dive in and like, what do you care about? You know, and I would say this actually, you know, especially to adults as well, I think it's really important to have a good introductory sense of Judaism. Like take an intro to Judaism class, just do it. Or read something like Joseph Telushkin's wonderful book, Jewish Literacy, or there are a couple other just good, solid intro books. Mine can also be a pretty good intro book, because what's really important is like Judaism is just all hyperlinked to each other, right? Like everything in Judaism is connected to everything else. So you really can't understand the holidays until you understand what the Torah is. And you can't understand what the Torah is until you know what the Talmud is. You can't understand the Talmud until you know what the life cycle, like you kind of need to just start learning. You need to kind of get the contours. You need to get the basics. You know, if you don't know the project and process of Judaism, when someone says something like the rabbis said X, sorry, who are the rabbis? Oh, well, when the temple was destroyed, it's like, sorry, the temple. Oh, okay. 2,000 years ago, Jews used to, it's like, there's so much context that just, if you don't know it, you're just kind of lost. So I think getting that good intro sense is really key. And then I would say, follow your passion, right? If your thing is hosting beautiful Shabbat meals, like do that, right? Really learn about Shabbat, engage in, you know, study recipes, read books about it. If your passion is Jewish ethics, if you like to argue, maybe you're a lawyer, great. There are amazing books on Jewish ethics. Maybe you want to study Talmud. Like there's so many different ways to engage in Judaism once you have that general introductory sense. But I think you just need, I hate to say it because it's so unsexy and like, who wants to do this? But it's just, it's so much richer if you actually know what's going on. You know, I have a rabbi I know, I love, he said, you know, if you say Moda Ani and you don't know what it means, like you'll have some kind of experience. But if you know it means I'm grateful, you're going to have an experience of gratitude. So I think just knowing what the words you're saying are, knowing the basics, I think that's just so huge. And then just following what lights up your brain. Whatever it is, whatever excited you, did spirituality excite you? Great. Try the Jewish meditation world. Whatever it is, follow that.
Nice. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I just want to let people know that we are going to be opening it up for questions. So you can start putting questions into the chat that you have so far. Okay, so I think we want to hear about the most Jewish speech you've ever written.
I wrote a Holocaust memorial speech in 2009. I've written probably some Hanukkah statements, but I actually think in some ways the most Jewish speech I've ever written was in 2016. And it was Mrs. Obama's final college commencement speech. And when I found out where she was going to be speaking, I was quite moved because it was at the City College of New York. And that was personally meaningful to me because when my great-grandparents first came to America, they actually settled in New York City. And my great-grandmother was so excited about this city college system because they accepted women, they accepted Jews, and they accepted people with no money, which was their family. They had 5 daughters, and so my great-grandmother thought, like, my girls can get an education. But then they wound up moving out of state. And so my grandmother, who was one of those 5 daughters, she never got the chance to go to college. And that was just a source of such heartbreak for her entire 99 years. She always told me she wanted to go to college, she wanted to go to law school, she wanted to be a lawyer, and she wanted to go into politics. She was this proud FDR Democrat. She cared about social justice. She was just this really amazing woman, but never got to do it. And so, here I am rolling up to the City College of New York with Michelle Obama, and it's just 2 generations later. And, I have gone to college, I've gone to law school, I am a lawyer, I am working in politics, and I'm with the first African-American First Lady of the United States of America, who has her own extraordinary American story. And, she's speaking to this new generation of striving, dreaming immigrants. Students at City College speak 100 languages, they are of 150 different nationalities, they work 2-3 jobs, they commute 2-3 hours a day, and they're just extraordinary. And to hear Michelle Obama say, immigrants have always been the greatest strength of our country. Our diversity has always made us great. I just kept thinking about my grandmother and how much I wish she had lived to see this moment, because it was, that school has such a Jewish history, and I felt like it was a very Jewish story, my being there. So it's probably in many ways the most Jewish speech I've written.
Well, what was your most Jewish moment in the White House? And I know there's this Hanukkah party that they have. And did you ever get to go to the Hanukkah party?
I did, which was very exciting. And it's actually funny. My most Jewish moment, I think, was probably at one of the Hanukkah parties, where it was the first one I went to. And I'm standing in this room with 700 Jews in the East Wing of the White House, right? They have brought in people to kosher the White House kitchens. The Maccabees are singing, this Jewish a cappella group. There's dreidel cookies and potato latkes and this at one point, just spontaneously, people started singing Ma'oz Zor, Rock of Ages, in Hebrew, in Hebrew. You have 700 Jews singing this Jewish song in Hebrew in the White House. And I remember just thinking, it's not that my grandparents couldn't have imagined this moment, but my parents couldn't have imagined this moment. I couldn't believe it. And I just thought, this is extraordinary. It really is, to be at a time in history when something like that can happen, when there's a White House Seder every year, right? Who could have known? Who could have guessed? So that was also a very Jewish moment.
Oh, that just gives me chills. I would not have been able to make it through that song without bursting into tears.
Yes.
So I guess as a final question before we turn it over to Q&A, you're a communications and messaging person, right?
Yes.
Do you think we're doing a good job of marketing the Jewish message? And what could we be doing better?
This is hard, right? I think that what we're kind of struggling with is for so long, we've sort of focused on Judaism as a peoplehood almost, we are a peoplehood, but we've almost tried to be an American style ethnicity, which makes no sense because Jews are literally every race and ethnicity. Judaism is not an ethnicity, not a thing. But we've sort of like been like, oh, I'm an ethnic Jew. That's what we are. It's like, that's great for 3 to 4 generations in America, right? That's like no one, very few people, very few people have as their foundational identity today being Irish American, Italian American, German American, right? 150 years ago, that was who you were. That determined your life, your neighborhood, but those ethnic identities fade. And I think we're seeing this, it's so silly to even say, but this Jewish ethnic identity, it's fading, right? And so I think, what's really important is Jewish substance, it's Jewish living, it's Jewish learning. And so, it makes me very nervous when I hear a message that goes something like Judaism equals anti-Semitism, the Holocaust plus Israel, right? It's like, I'm like, wait, that's what Judaism is? I mean, yes, of course, anti-Semitism is and Holocaust denial and ignorance. These are huge problems. Anyone who doesn't think that has been living under a rock. Right? We are really seeing a rise in this kind of violence against Jews. Israel, also central to the Jewish people. But like, what about the other 4,000 years of Judaism? Our ethics, our spirituality, our life cycle rituals, our holiday, our music, our history, our culture, our food, our languages, like to shrink Judaism down to just a couple of things, I don't get it, right? I don't think that makes a lot of sense. And it's sort of, these are things where you're kind of almost trying to get this kind of peoplehood identity of like, we're under threat and we need to be afraid and people are attacking us, which like, yeah, those things are true, but that's not a reason to be Jewish. Right? A reason to be Jewish is because we have 4,000 years of wisdom on what it means to be human. And Judaism offers a tremendous way to have a beautiful life. So I think I'd like to see a little bit more of a positive and affirmative message for Judaism.
I love that. Those things are true. And they've always been true. Like,
yes. Not new problems. We're like the ever-dying people, right? It's like, yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Dalit, who has been keeping an eye on the chat for some other questions.
Great. It's been so wonderful to hear from both of you, both the questions and the reactions and the thoughts. One of the questions, Sarah, that I wanted to ask around that moment when you were 36 and you walked into that class, did you ever think about, was the question ever on your mind of whether Judaism was really the religion for you? Was there really a question about whether you belong to this people? Was it this religion, or was something about even just walking in and saying it's the Intro to Judaism class that I'm interested in right now? Is that just a given?
It was just a given, right? Like I, as disconnected as I was, I did feel vaguely nebulously Jewish. I didn't know what that meant, but I felt Jewish. And, I've learned about other traditions. I sat in Buddhist meditation spaces, and I find, aspects of Buddhism to be interesting and helpful, but, I am Jewish. And I actually think a lot about that idea of choice. Like, oh, we're all Jews by choice. We can all choose. And I don't, it's like, is Judaism objectively better than any other tradition? I don't know if I could say that. I think that each tradition offers a unique approach and its own wisdom. But I love Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, his metaphor that he uses of a library, where like you can go in, you can pick, modern secular culture. It's like you just pick any book off the shelf you want, Buddhism, Christianity, astrology. If you like it, keep it. If not, put it back, whatever, fine. But if you happen to see an old leather-bound book with your family's name on it, says like Hurwitz, and you pull it down and you open it up and you realize that it's actually each generation of your family writing wisdom about what it means to be human for centuries and centuries and centuries, and the last page is blank and it has your name on it. Like, are you just going to be like, oh, cool, I think I'm going to take the Buddhism? No, right? You're not. Is that book better than the other books in some objective sense? Who knows? What a silly question. But the point is, it's a story of your family. And like the stories of our families matter to us. They have a claim on us. I think Rabbi Sacks really just, that's just the best argument for why be Jewish that I can actually come up with, which maybe it's not a great argument, but it really speaks to me, right? This is wisdom that people have sacrificed and fought for centuries and centuries and centuries to hand down to me, and to just cavalierly kind of toss it away, to just not care. You're really turning your back on 4,000 years of something extraordinary and on some of the most extraordinary people the world has ever known. So maybe give it a chance.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think there's so many people who get to that moment where they're asking the question of who am I? And the answer is actually that like it's out there, and it's worth actually pursuing that question a little bit more with the canon that you have in front of you. There have been a bunch of questions about the just how political the world around us is today, and coming from a place yourself that is immersed within political life and ideas and debates. And the question is really about what principles in Judaism can help us address or have helped you address the increasing polarities in our lives. When you think about how political and polarizing the world is, and in particular this country, do you lean on Judaism for some wisdom?
I do, because I think, it's just, it's such an ugly time right now. It's just so hard to even wrap your mind around it or process it. And I do, because I think sometimes I see among well-meaning people, this idea of like, well, there's two sides. And, it's like, well, like there's that side, and we kind of like put them both on cable news, and that's true. And it's like, no, there's people who have different views, and those people are created in the image of the divine, and they are all infinitely worthy, and they deserve to be treated as such. Like no person, no matter what their beliefs, should be degraded or demeaned or dismissed or dehumanized. Like there's no sides when it comes to human beings. So I think that in the image idea that is so central to Judaism, I think it's Judaism's just defining core value. I think I really try to keep that in mind. That drives me. But I also think when actually evaluating what is being said, sometimes there are not two sides, right? Like racism isn't a side, right? Saying that vaccines are a plot to implant microchips, that's not a side, right? There's truth and there's lies. There's facts and there's fiction. We can evaluate this. It's like a modern world, enlightenment, science. Like we all, like, we're kind of slipping. And I feel like there's a little bit of a sloppiness that sometimes people get into where it's like, well, but they say that the vaccines have microchips and that's their belief. It's like, okay, but that's not true, right? That's actually a lie. That's not a fact. So we can respect them and honor them and treat them with dignity, but we need to be very clear about what's true and what's not true. And we need to be clear about what is cruel and what is not cruel. Calling certain groups of people in this country animals or rapists or criminals. I mean, we have seen this language before, right? Like just some of the language and the rhetoric that we are seeing, we have seen it before. And I got to tell you, it's not coming equally from both sides. Like, I just think we need to kind of, be thoughtful about where this is coming from. And I think we as Jews, if any people should just be particularly sensitive about this. So every person is created in the image of the divine, but there's facts and there's fiction, there's lies and there's truth, and there is cruelty and there is kindness. And there is a difference between those things. I think we can use our traditions to help us discern.
Thanks. You've spoken a lot about the pieces within Judaism that really spoke to you as you were going through the process that you describe in your book and at that moment in your life. Are there any areas where Jewish teachings really didn't satisfy you, or where you felt like there was a gap, or something that you actually just like didn't understand that was part of the canon or the wisdom that's out there?
That is such a great question. I really love that question. There's certainly things about Judaism. There's certainly aspects of Judaism that don't move me as much as other aspects. I'm taking a class on medieval thought and theology now. And I will tell you, Cappella, like not my jam. Studying it, I think it's interesting. It's interesting. I think there's, I sort of appreciate that the Kabbalists are like, we're just going to say everything about God, all the things, every image, every metaphor, everything. But like, I don't know, there's parts of it that just strike me as a little bit mythologized. And I just like not my thing. I do think, I think one part of Judaism that I struggle a little bit with is just the life cycle rituals. I think that our synagogues are very much arranged around those, right? Like you come in, you want the b'nai mitzvah for your kid, you want the wedding, you want the funeral, the death, and that's all beautiful and important. But like many people are not getting married, or they're living in other kinds of arrangements. Many people are not having kids, right? And I think that oftentimes for those people, it's like, I'm in my 40s, I'm single, I don't have kids. Many shuls feel like a weird fit for me. It's like, oh, I'm here, like, great, you can send your kids to, oh no, okay, you don't. It's like, what do you do? And I think that focus, that sort of traditional, I want to say focused. It's not actually true of many Jews today, like half of Jews, just like half of Americans are not married. Many Jews don't have kids. So just thinking a little bit beyond the sort of shul structured around life cycle rituals, I think that's something that just feels a little outdated to me.
Great. When you were speaking a few minutes ago in response to the question about how polarizing the world we live in right now is, there were a couple of questions that were coming in about Israel. And one of the questions that I think really captured well many of the questions that were coming in were about whether you could talk a little bit more about how you answer challenges from the BDS movement, or that Israel is an apartheid state. And I think more generally, some of the other questions that people were asking is really like how you see yourself as an American Jew, speaking on issues that have to do with another state, but of course, a place that's close to home in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I find the conversation about Israel to be incredibly depressing and dismaying. I'm really disheartened by it. Like, I feel like we were kind of sane in the 90s where we're all like, a two-state solution, that makes sense. Like, and now we've sort of just gone to these like bizarre extremes on both sides. Actually, this is, I think, a part where you can actually see some real extremes on both sides. And I find the standard to which Israel is held is to be unreasonable and to be unfair. And I do think it's held to a different standard than every other country. And I find that frustrating. I also think that there are legitimate critiques to be made of Israel, just like there are legitimate critiques to be made of America. And I think people can make them without being accused of being self-hating or anti-Zionist or anti-Semitic. I think the problem with any conversation around Israel is that like no one knows anything. Right? Like people are having these conversations, sort of tossing these charged, polarized talking points with no sense of the history, no sense of the politics, like no sense of the insane complexity that surrounds this issue. So it's like, what do you say to these people? I'm like, okay, look, let me take you back. It's like, I can't say it in a tweet, right? I can't say it in like on social media, right? Like these are really complex issues that I think need time and thought and attention. And there is nothing about the social media or modern media environment that allows for that, which is why I despise social media. I think it is destroying our democracy and many democracies around the world. And I think it's corrupting our souls. I think we are now living in a way that we are constantly curating our lives for others' consumption. And I think that's incredibly dangerous and just disconnected and just soul-sapping way to live. And I think you see how that has just infected the debate around Israel, where it's just become really messy. And I just feel like the sane people were all just like, whoa, what is happening here? Like, this is so extreme. And I think we need more knowledge. And I don't have a great, like, I don't think throwing my charged talking points at their charged talking points, I don't think that does much.
Actually, another fascinating question that came up that I think actually relates a lot to what you were just saying, but it's about artificial intelligence technologies. And one of the questions was, with the growing adoption and dependence on artificial intelligence technologies today, how can we both ensure that we use and develop these technologies with a sense of Jewish ethics? How do we build and become what this person calls cyber mensches? And I think this really comes from many of the warnings you've shared about knowledge, fact, fiction, truth, all of these things that you've been speaking about for a little bit now.
It's such a great question. I don't know a lot about AI, so I just want to be clear about that. But, I think, AI reflects our biases, right? Like AIs are racist. Like there's actually like when, people's biases and racism actually affects AIs. Like studies have shown this, that we encode our own biases into AI. So I think like being aware of our own prejudices, biases, stereotypes is like incredibly important. Like human beings are creating this stuff. I also just think like we need to just think about the kind of culture and zeitgeist that the people who are creating these things are immersed in. Right? If your motto is move fast and break things, if it's sort of like, the bottom line, making money, if it's convenience, if it's like, I want to change the world for me, like I want to get my organic dry cleaning at 3 a.m. in an Uber, like, again, like, are these great values, right? No, I think they're horrible. Like, I think we're kind of seeing, I think in, things like Facebook, we see really just poor values that are being carried out and enacted. And there seems to be like a lack of conscience in the way that goes. So I don't know the exact mechanism for this, but I do think that we have to be really thoughtful about the human beings who are creating this, about what their values are and about what their biases are and about what their goals are. So that's, it's one thing if an AI is being created to analyze, a biopsy from someone who might have breast cancer, like great, the potential to heal and to do great things, that's wonderful. But if it's being used to screen out job applicants and like, how is that being used? Like what biases are being encoded? You better be a little careful there. So I think just knowing who's creating them and what they're bringing to it is very important.
That's great. When you started in either that class at age 36 or when you started to do more reading and thinking about your own personal relationship to Judaism, to what extent did it start as something that was cerebral? Was it something that was rooted in an individual pursuit, a communal one? I think a lot of people ask not just the question, and some of the question here is really about you, but it's also about other people looking inward for themselves, that many people identify with your story of having had a Jewish experience growing up or a Jewish educational environment that left something to be desired. And they know that, and they're adults and they're mature. And so with time, people are asking the question of where do I start? And if when they look to you and they see that you've had a process that was so fulfilling, I think for a lot of people, there's an interest in knowing a little bit more about what wisdom you might have for them if they're too looking to deepen their connection to what I often call Jews, Judaism, and Jewish life.
Yeah, I think for me, it did start as kind of a personal journey, right? Where I kind of, once I started learning about Judaism, I think it revealed to me just how thin the secular world is, right? Like I think the defining secular ethic, at least in America, strikes me as something along the lines of you do you as long as you don't hurt other people too much, right? It's like defined by freedom and liberty and like do whatever you want as long as you don't destroy people's property, physically assault them, or infringe on their civil liberties and civil rights. It's a pretty low bar, and that is the way that I feel like a lot of us are living. And it's okay. I don't think that makes for a deep and rich and satisfying life. Right? I think that there are values like generosity, self-sacrifice, self-transcendence, maturity, wisdom. Those were things I was starting to see in Judaism that I wasn't so much seeing in this kind of secular world. So I think for me, studying Jewish ethics was actually really, Joseph Telushkin, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin has a wonderful 2-volume set on Jewish ethics. And it's, they're long, but they're very accessible. And I found them to just be tremendously helpful. I also think for me, I wanted to have a spiritual life that was plausible, right? Like I'm not, do I think there is a being in the sky that controls everything? I do not. I find that an untenable and implausible belief, but that's no longer like a wall to me for the connection to the divine, because I realize that's just a concept, right? Many of us sense something out there, and but the concepts we have actually block us from it. We're like, well, it's not a man in the sky, so I guess it's nothing. No, it's not nothing. Like many of us sense something. There are all of these concepts and metaphors, and there's all this language in Judaism that can help you define it and understand it. And there are lots of books you can read. There are meditation retreats and classes you can attend. There are the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Or Halev are 2 organizations that do a lot of really deep spiritual work, and a lot of shuls, right? Rav Tiferet Shul, many other shuls, like they really are deeply spiritually engaged. You're seeing this more and more, and they offer that. So I just think that for me, those were key things for me, places that I felt were kind of missing in my life and where I wanted to connect. And you all might have different places you're missing, but I think figuring out what's missing, figuring out what you yearn for, and then going to a rabbi like Rav Tiferet and saying, this is what I'm missing, this is what I'm yearning for, and they can actually help begin to guide you. So I think that's probably how I approach it.
Great. And I have one last question, but I'm saying this and speaking slowly in case anyone in the audience has any more questions that they want to put into the chat. Otherwise, we'll leave here, which is how did your Jewish journey affect your time in the White House?
It's funny, like it didn't change my values, right? Like instead what happened was in Judaism, I kind of recognized my values, but much more deeply articulated, much better stated, with so much substance and with a real, a much higher bar than I think I held myself to. So I think about that basic in the image idea, which Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg beautifully articulates it, drawing on Jewish tradition. He says this gives us three inalienable dignities, right? We're all infinitely worthy, can't put a price on a human life. We're each equal. No one's better than anyone else. And we're each fundamentally unique. There's no one else like us. And I realized like, oh, that's the thesis of every speech I write for Michelle Obama. Every speech, that's what she was saying. And when she was talking about kids getting an education, she was saying every single one of these children is infinitely valuable. They are all equal to every child on this planet, including my daughters. And each kid is unique. They each have this unique world of potential to offer us. And so I think to me, it was like, oh, right, that's what I think. But it was so much deeper and it demanded so much more of me. I think it's easy to say things like Judaism, my social Judaism is, for me, my Judaism is social justice. That's great. That's also your Islam and your Christianity. Like everyone likes social justice, right? But Judaism has this really unique approach to social justice and to serving others. And I think the more I studied, the more I recognized that in my own sensibility that I brought to speeches, and the more I just recognized it in the Obama White House.
It's great. It's so helpful. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, Sarah, and you, Rav Tiferet, for joining us tonight, and for all of the people who joined us tonight from their living rooms and from their bedrooms and from their offices. We have people here from really all over the world. It's really exciting. Many people from Massachusetts, but really people from all over the world. And we hope to see you all again very soon. In the chat, you're going to see more information about a couple of upcoming events at the Vilna and at HBI. This Sunday, the Vilna is going to be hosting a community-wide Hanukkah a cappella concert. This event is currently sold out. So if you are interested in joining the wait list, just click on the register link and follow the prompt. One of the best parts of organizing this program was witnessing the joy and excitement and receptivity of our partners upon receiving the invitation to collaborate and perform. We're a city with extraordinary universities, Hillels, and Jewish day schools, and bringing them all together has just been a real privilege. On December 16th, we also hope you will join us as we hear from youth of the Boys and Girls Club of Boston as they express their vision for America through spoken word, poetry, and musical performances inspired by Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus. This event is free, virtual, and open to all. And we also want to highlight two events by HBI. The first is Rabbi Haviva Ner David is going to be speaking at the Sandra Seltzer Silberman HBI Conversations series about her inspiring novel, Hope Valley, the story of the unexpected friendship between a Jewish Israeli woman and a Palestinian Israeli. And then HBI, Vilna, J Arts are all co-sponsoring Studio Israel on December 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern, when Yuval Ivri of Brandeis will be in conversation with Netta Al-Kayam, an Israeli singer and his visual artist whose work plumbs the culture of the Moroccan Jews from which she descended. So all of that information should be in the chat. And I just want to say one more time, thank you both for joining us. This was such an enriching conversation. The time flew by, and we hope to see all of you very soon. Bye.